Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Craft of the Draft podcast. I'm John T. Ralph Smith, one of your co-hosts, and alongside me is Nathan Seppi, and we've got Nick Cox with us as well. We hope you've enjoyed the content, by the way. In the first couple of weeks, we've spoken to some coaches and worked the phones to find out about what the leaders of NAB League clubs will be bringing to the table in 2023. The player-specific content is still to come, so stand by for that, but looking forward to speaking to Coxie about what goes into developing draft talent. So, Coxie, thanks for jumping on. The Dandenong Stingrays coach entering his fifth year. Looking forward to speaking to you.
Yeah, thanks, gents. Look forward to chewing the fat and having a chat about the talent pathways.
Well, let's get stuck into it, and I guess a bit of background. Coxie, your boys made it all the way to the grand final last year, which is a great achievement, and you've put a lot of faith in your bottom ages, especially last year, and I guess that really showed off this year as well, because 6 of the boys got selected for Vic Country for the Stingrays. And I guess give us a bit of insight into how pre-season's travelling at the moment, how are those bottom ages travelling, and the whole squad in general.
Yeah, I think, look, we were really pleased that, we went a fair way last year, and we were beaten by a much talented squad. But we're really happy with what we're able to do as a region, particularly, giving, as you just touched on, Nathan, the bottom ages a little bit of a glimpse of what the then NAB League, and now it's called the Coates Hire Talent Pathways, the Talent League, sorry. So, yeah, we gave them a little bit of a glimpse, and I think that's the thing that, at the end of the day, particularly in the second half of that grand final last year, is that our 17-year-olds really stood up and made a real impact in what they did on the ground. And, they've sort of led into that with pre-season. There's the standards that they've brought to pre-season. Not only the six players who made the initial Vic Country squad, but, players like Billy Wilson and Matt Nelson, Jack Wilson. They've just come back with really high standards and really good leadership, and it's driving all the other players around them. So we're really pleased with what we've got thus far.
I guess a key part of our podcast we want to focus on is things that really don't get mentioned in the mainstream media, and I think something that was on John T and I's mind a bit throughout the week is, I guess, how do you manage development of those fringe players who probably could get sucked into what's happening on the mainstream media if your name isn't getting read out as much, or you're not hearing much about yourself outside of the club. How do you celebrate, I guess, the little wins these players might have to work themselves up the ranks and build around a culture that really supports these players to develop to a high standard without being affected with what's happening outside your big country and mainstream media talk throughout the year?
Yeah, look. Obviously, the social media side of things is becoming massive now, and there's so many different sort of angles that comes from, which is great for the players who are, getting the traction in that. But for the players who are sort of on the fringe, like you speak about, it becomes quite distressing at times, and they get quite anxious about things. And I think that, having the conversations with them about what they can control, which is quite simplistic, but at the same time is, that's what we can speak to them about and let their actions speak. And at the end of the day, I always say if they're good enough, they'll get found. But it is becoming quite hard. And the expectations on players when they come into our system is, that they've been the best player in their community or local footy sides, and they come in and they're, sort of all of a sudden really quickly they realise that there's players just as good, if not better, in their region, and then there's players just as good, if not better, that they're playing against. So they have to adapt fairly quickly. So I think it's about talking about the expectations, realistic expectations as well about where they sit, but having those conversations and those honest conversations. And sometimes it's really hard to talk to a player about sort of where they sit, but at the same time, I think they respect that and they understand it, and then they can go to work in what tools we can give them to help them become better.
And I guess with those players that, are really looking to progress and they're hearing things around the media, and as much as the coaches will try and foster them, how much do you try and separate the individualism behind building their ability to play really high quality football and get recognised, but also buying into what the team's trying to achieve during the year?
Yeah, well, I reckon that I think that aspect of things changing a lot across the talent pathways in every region is that, we as coaches, and I think it's been clearly evident by the amount of work that we've done all together as, coach hire coaches, that we're all one program. We've got one goal, and that is that to develop players to make them better once they start in our program to finish in our program. Now, whether they get to the AFL level, that's a bonus. Whether they get to VFL level or they just go back and become very good community footballers, is that our role is to develop these players to become better. Nothing else. It's not about, being an AFL player. It's not about that's the be all and end all. So I think that and I'm pretty sure that I speak for some of the country regions, but also particularly our region, is that the time that they have in a talent pathways program, A, it should be enjoyable, B, they should become better. But that team aspect, I mean, our boys will never forget the grand final last year and how far they went. It'll be something in their memories as footballers forever and a day. Now, they're going to learn from that as well, the feeling that they had. But I think that it's becoming better where it's not as much about the individual as what, possibly in years gone past that it has been. And the team aspect and the ability to grow together as a group is becoming more evident.
Has that been a change in coaching at all, or is that just sort of naturally evolved from your perspective?
No, it definitely has. And, we're talking a long time ago, but, 15, 20 years ago, is that the emphasis on the which was the TAC back then is probably, getting draftable players through to the next level. Whereas now, which is a great direction from the AFL, is that, making young players better wherever they may land, and we've seen it across, in our region in recent years. Matt Cottrell, as an 18-year-old, missed out in the draft, then went away pre-season and got on Carlton's list in the pre-season draft. As recently as Jai Cully, come back as a 19-year-old and got on West Coast list. So if they're good enough, they eventually get found. So our job is, as 17, 18-year-old young men, is that we try and help them, give them the tools to become better. And if they go back to local and have to hone their skills a little bit, get on a VFL list, there's so many more opportunities.
And you talk about, players becoming better now and that being more than just the draft. How much do you focus on process over result? And I suppose, how do you emphasize that to a 17, 18, 19-year-old person who might want to get drafted? And that's obviously the ultimate goal. How do you ensure that message is adhered to and comprehended rather than, I suppose, heard and dismissed?
Yeah, well, I think as well, Jonty, is that now that the players have got a lot more opportunities than just the November draft. I mean, in years gone past, that was it, and it was the be all and end all. And unfortunately, the disappointment of missing out of that, and that was it. Whereas now the AFL got given us so many more opportunities, given players so many more opportunities. You got the SSV stuff, you got mid-season draft, you got pre-season draft stuff. You obviously got the national draft. Players can be added if they're good enough and going well from any sort of part of the world. And we, Collingwood, pulled someone from Shepparton to be drafted. So, look, there's so many more opportunities. And let's be realistic about it. Footy at the highest level is hard. Even at local level, it's hard. Footy's hard. So you've got to be really good at it. And you've got to be, your skills and your fundamentals and your mental mindset, etc., has got to be really, and conditioning has got to be really good. It's hard, and some people don't get it until they're 22. Some get it when they're 17, and it's just different levels, for different personnel, it clicks for 1 minute. So, to answer, there's so many more opportunities now, and that's what we preach as well. In our program, and I think overall in all, the COAT's higher talent pathway system.
And I suppose work ethic is a word, it's a phrase, it's a concept that comes up a lot in the Coates Higher Talent League. Tell us a bit more about that. And I suppose more than that, you hear in the mainstream media the guys that get drafted, obviously they're always doing the extras and that kind of thing. How common is it for guys to do extras? Because it's not all that common, but people who might read some stuff might think everyone sort of does it. Is it just the guys who get drafted that do those extras? And what do those extras look like in practice?
Well, no, it's not always the guys who get drafted. I mean, I've seen many a player across the years who've done the extras and think that they're doing, the right thing to give themselves every opportunity. And you know what? Sometimes, unfortunately, not football but in life is that you fall a little bit short. There's nothing wrong with that. The great thing I would have thought about all those players and most players who come through a talent pathway is that. Whether it be at 17 or whether it be at 24 or 35, eventually the penny drops on what they should have done or what they shouldn't have done. And it's obviously the one that comes to mind really quickly is, Jai Cully, doing the extra stuff to get the mid-season draft. But I mean, we talked about ground balls with mum and all the extra stuff that he was doing. But at the end of the day, he had talent and he had a weapon that was different to other players. That's why he got to the level that he's got to. I think the hard part is obviously it's getting there and then getting a game. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is with certain players, but the ones who do that little bit extra, and it might only be getting their rehab right, getting proper sleep, getting doing the eating patterns right, etc. So the minor things or the 1 or 2% can be the difference. Absolutely. I think we get caught up sometimes in players think that they should do all this extra stuff outside of the program that we're setting them, and they just become really tired and they become overloaded, and then they can't do things as well as what they could do if they were a little bit fresh. So there's a little bit of education on that as well from our point of view.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask about that. Tell me about where is that sort of Goldilocks zone where players don't do too much, because I suppose if they do too much, then there is obviously the risk of, putting all their eggs in one basket and then, putting too much pressure on yourself, and that shows on the field with, everything they do, players getting down on themselves, etc. How do you ensure that doesn't occur?
Well, just to strip it back a little bit, our biggest focus with, players at the moment who are going through VCE and school is that's their first importance. Yeah. Because 2 to 5% out of most regions get drafted, and because it's very hard to get drafted. So having a backup is probably at our forefront. I would have thought. Sorry, what was the question you asked again, Jonty?
Just about the pressures and how you ensure.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's different beasts. So, for an example, a player. A Jacob Wiedering can do some extra stuff because he's more developed, possibly as an 18-year-old compared to someone else. So, all these players as 16, 17, see, whether it be Wiedering or Hunter Clark or Luke Davies-Uniacke or whoever do all this extra stuff, and they think, oh, that's what I've got to do to get drafted. Well, it's not, because those boys have got, clearly some different attributes to what those people have. And I suppose as well, I mean, there's so many, they've got school, they've got, they got their local footy, they can get personal trainers, they can get, all that, these type of assistance. But at the end of the day, I don't care what anyone says, is that the pathways gives everyone the tools to make them better without having to do anything external.
Yeah, well, I'm done.
I want to talk about now, it's actually quite fitting that this topic of conversation comes in. I want to talk about talent, and we just found out the other day that it's now changing to the talent league, as we've alluded to throughout the episode. But I want to ask in terms of talent, it's such a wide topic of conversation now. But I guess, what do you take as a coach? What are AFL recruiters telling you, and what do they want players to develop into? Because I think someone like you who's been around the program for 5 years, your idea of development might be different to what AFL clubs are wanting out of players. And I think, NAB League, Talent League clubs now would want to develop players in probably a more holistic way, where it's not just focused on getting to the AFL. It's becoming better people and making your game more about yourself and how you go about it outside of the football field as well. But really, what is talent to you? Because it's such a really good topic of conversation that could go in a lot of different ways. But how do you approach it as a coach?
Yeah, and I think this is a really tough question, because I'm not the oracle, and I do not know, I have all the answers. Because if I spoke to one club compared to another club, well, their thoughts on talent is it's almost same, but it might be a little bit different. So, the way that we gauge talent, we've obviously, not only got not so much a template, but we've got an idea of what the next level look for, and even what they look for at VFL level. So it's it's a combination of a heap of things. It's a combination of, obviously, being really good with fundamentals, and that's really simplistic as well. But your ability to not turn the ball over with your fundamentals, whether it be hot by hand or fit, your ability to make really good decisions, your ability, as I just said, to be good with your execution. Your conditioning is at a competent enough level that once you get to an AFL club or a VFL club, that you're going to continue to get better. And I think the thing that I've noticed this year, particularly from some of our players who get drafted, is that it becomes, for some of these clubs, a need as well. The type of player that they actually need. So, for instance, Jackson Binns is one that comes to mind from this year's draft, who went to Carlton, whose running ability is exceptional. He can play a really good role on the outside. And his decision making is okay. It got better as the year went on, but his ability to get up and down the ground, defensively, and then offensively be really good, is something from their point of view that they would have thought that it would be a need basis. I reckon, if I'm being, without being smart in saying it, I reckon you can see talent from a long way back. Particularly as we've got our 16-year-olds in at the moment, I reckon you can see it by some of the things that players do, not only with that decision making, but, things in traffic, their ability to mark the ball at certain levels, their kicking ability, etc. So you can see it from a fair way away. I think that the perception from particularly the local football is, and one I must admit that is changing, and the great thing about the pathways is that we're able to go out and actually educate our coaches on this, is that it's not about possessions. It's not about getting 45 possessions in a game if your execution's poor, you're turning it over, etc., etc. So I think that you can see talent from a fair way back. It comes in all different shapes and sizes, but it really does. I hope I've answered that okay. I haven't really given you an answer. You can see it from a fair way back.
Yeah, well, look, there's no straight answer to it. I guess expanding on it, talent's something that is evolving, and you would have seen that evolve over the last 5 years. And I guess what you spoke about with Jackson, if a club's going to hone in on a particular skill base of a player, do you focus on that more throughout the year, or do you just give the player the freedom to develop their full game? Or if they've got a better potential to really get in through that one particular skill, you're going to push that a bit more?
I think that skill gets highlighted anyway, whether it's, with Jackson in particular, some of his GPS stuff was exceptional at national level, and obviously back with us. So, and Matt Cottrell was another one that comes to mind that had that ability to, get up and down the ground as well. So no, we don't hone in on it because I mean, one club says one thing and another says another. So we've got to be careful that we don't just concentrate on one thing, and particularly when a club misses that particular player on draft night, you sort of think to yourself, well, that was a bit of a mistake. But no, we like to. I think that's one thing that the pathway sort of shows, that we like to allow the players to showcase their talents in all different areas, all different positions. So it's not just one particular thing. There's some players that are really good in one particular area, but still, the question mark is always asked, can he be good in another position or area as well? So it's important that we showcase that too.
And I suppose the contrast of that is versatility, the importance of versatility at the level. At what stage are you sort of saying, okay, we've shown you enough on the wing if you're talking about Jackson, or if you're speaking about another player, we've shown you enough in the midfield to show that you can play there and you've got that as a strength. We can now trial you up forward. How much of that is coaching instinct and how much of that by AFL clubs wanting to
look, I think one thing I picked up today, I saw over the last few days that Cody Waitman's been doing a little bit of midfield work at the Bulldogs, and I remember a game at Bendigo vividly where obviously it was a fantastic and very skillful small forward who won games off his own boot, but there was one day, I think it was against Geelong, the Falcons, that he went into the middle and sort of changed the dynamics of the game, just from his skill set he sort of brought. And I remember speaking to recruiters that year, and they love the ability for someone to go and showcase in other areas. So it is very, very important that we do that. In saying that, I mean, if someone's dominating in one particular area, you don't want to move them too much. I wouldn't have thought. And, look, it's no secret that Sibba get over the line this year, and his numbers as a midfielder with us and obviously Vic Country were exceptional, and unfortunately it hasn't been enough at the moment. So that's sort of a really good reason why we need to continue to enhance him in other areas. And Sibba went forward a little bit and hit the scoreboard and did some good things, but I think that's becoming very important. I think you guys understand that as well. Versatility is key.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sibba there, Mitch Sivkovsky, obviously your captain last year. One thing that was always highlighted with him when I spoke to people for work was his character, and that's one that's often highlighted as well in draft settings. Tell us a bit more about character, and I suppose specific character traits that are sought after, the resilience and the grit and those sort of things. Why are those so important, and how do you sort of see them in practice, both on the training track and in games, that convinces you that if I'm speaking to an AFL recruiter, this guy sort of ticks the box?
Yeah. Look, I think that's the most important thing when they walk in the door. Their expectations are quite high when they do come in. I mean, mum, dad, their friends, their family, their whole circle is thinking that they're going to get drafted when they walk in, and we talk about and we educate, which is great, and we've got a lot of help from that in the pathways in the last few years about how we can keep their expectations realistic. But character is massive for us, and I think it's massive across the pathways program. That I'm sure that clubs are not going to allow immaturity or disrespectful players to come into their footy club. They want players who are going to adapt to a team environment. You talked about grit and work rate and all that type of stuff, and just put their head down and go to work. And that's one thing from my point of view, from a region point of view, that I think we do very, very well. We turn them into better people as well, and there's not too many, if any, along the way that have gone again the other way, basically. So we're pretty proud of that stuff as well.
How do you do that? How do you turn them into better people? Is that just being part of a program where there's good people around? Do you do things?
Look, it has started, and I've only sort of touched. I've been in for about 10 years now, and I started with Graham Yates, who instilled it, and Craig Black obviously didn't put up with any players sort of getting ahead of themselves, etc. And the way things are done back then to what they are now are a little bit different. We have to be a little bit careful on how we speak and how we say things to players, and I think that's just part of the the way things are evolving. But when they walk in the door, speaking to parents and speaking to them about where they sit and what's required being in this program and the expectations that they actually have to fulfil being in for us a Stingray squad. It's the pre-season 80 kids come in out of thousands.
Yeah.
It's a privilege, and you should be honoured to wear the jumper. Most of the boys, if not all of the boys, do that.
Yeah, and clearly without individualising, how common is it for players to come in and not necessarily have that character initially and then be able to develop it? Like when they're 16, 17, are they malleable enough still to be able to go from someone who doesn't have it and isn't going to adapt to a full-time environment or even a semi-professional environment, VFL level, to then develop it in them?
Yeah, I think it does change, Jonty. I mean, we obviously see the boys at 15, 16 and they're coming in with bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and being the best player in the region and come in and think that it's just going to happen. And I think that without being too hard on those players, we sort of let them know about not getting ahead of themselves, and there's still a long way to go. It's just managing expectations as well. And there's been so many, without naming names, that come in as a 15, 16-year-old with a really poor attitude to when they leave the program being exceptional people. And I think that's the same across a lot of the regions, I would have thought.
And does that just come through your coaching? Is that just a case of the way you coach is sort of imparted upon them? Is there any other parts of the program? Is it speaking to the wellbeing coordinator, for example? What is it that I suppose straightens them out and smooths those edges?
Well, I think the great thing about, and I look, the regions are all same what we do and how we do things.
Yeah.
I would have thought that all regions are like this. Is that my job is to make sure that we educate our coaches on how things are going to be done, and our staff and our well-being, etc. And Toby's obviously the same with his expectations as well. I just think it's a flow effect of what we've been able to achieve with our footy and do with our footy, and it's just actually in a way teaching them life lessons. To become better in those areas. It's not rocket science, but we've got these boys for 3 to 4 years at times, and we are a really big. We forget about how big an influence we are on them at times, and so hopefully we're guiding them in the right way.
And you talk about them coming in sometimes when they're 15, 16-year-olds being a bit, being the big fish in the pond. What are you sort of expecting from them, and how does the expectation change? Like I know Shifter, for example, talks a lot about 17-year-olds. They just need to show glimpses in that bottom age year to, warrant selection in their top age year, and they've still got a year ahead of them. What are the differences from your perspective in expectation for a bottom ager and then even an overager? What's incumbent on the demand?
It's interesting you just talked on that. That is one big thing that we try and talk about straight away, is that these players are coming in, and even at I was at 16's training last night, and we were doing some full ground drills, and some boys touched the ball in 10 minutes 2 to 3 times. Now you might think to yourself, well, maybe the drill's not being done right, but obviously we do fundamentals and touch after that, but if they're doing that, if they go back to local training, they're touching the ball every 30 seconds and getting a lot of touch. So in those 2 to 3 touches, what we are looking for is that moment where they do things very well. And then educating them on that is, well, how do you think you trained? I didn't go too well in this. Why is that? I didn't get many touches. Yeah, but you did this, this, and this. And this is what we're looking for. We can see glimpses, the crystal ball effect, in a couple of years' time of what you possibly could output. And Kevin does that very well. He's obviously, I think he's never said anything negative about any player in the history of football, but he can see, he's very good at seeing the crystal ball stuff in players' attributes, and that's what we look for as well. Players get very anxious and upset and think that they're not going as well as what they are, but our opinion on it's a little bit different.
Yep. And what about the other end of the spectrum for the 19-year-olds? You've obviously got a few returning this year, and there always are a few that return. What's incumbent on them? They've obviously had a lot of exposure, and every time they play, they might be taking a position away from a 16 or 17-year-old.
Yeah. Well, Jai Kelly's made it very hard for us because every 10-year-old who comes back think that they're going to be the number one draft pick. But
yeah.
In saying that as well is that, the AFL, the pathway program is sort of capped what we can do with the 19-year-olds this year, which is a great initiative. So those players, well, right now, all our 19-year-olds, except for one because of a long-term injury at a VFL club.
Yeah.
I was speaking to Ziggy Toledo today, who will be coming back as a 19-year-old. He's doing a pre-season at Casey, and I asked him, I said, what's the difference between us and a VFL club? And it's obviously the intensity.
Yeah.
And how long that they train for. I think they start at 6, and he said they don't finish till about 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
So it's a big session. But realistically as well is that honing in what where they want to get to, and a lot of them will be thinking about mid-season draft again, and I think that some of our players will have the ability to do that, like there will be in every region, but setting them up as well, if that actually doesn't happen, to giving them a connection with a VFL club is very important as well. And you know what, Jonty and Nath, I think that what we've got to realise as well is that it's hard to get on a VFL list now. It's not to get on a VFL list. So they should be, celebrated when that does happen, I would have thought.
Who are the guys, just while we've got you, that are on VFL lists? You've got, I think, Nick Collier's in the Frankston Academy. You've got Harry Colopy's with Frankston, Ziggy, you mentioned, in Milbrennan. Yeah,
Justin Davies is at Frankston as well. We've got Finn Milbrennan's at Casey, like you just said. Just trying to think. Taj Campbell-Farrell went out to Williamstown and made their list, which is fantastic. Nick Collier, like you say. Colopy, like you say. I was trying to think of some of the... Ned's training at Casey at the moment, so he's got to tick a few boxes, but he's got an opportunity to be a 19-year-old back with us as well. Ben Todd's at Frankston at the moment. So there's, they're all plying their trade at VFL clubs, and hopefully, they get the opportunity. It's going to be tough to get a game in a VFL system next year, but I think they're giving themselves every opportunity, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Well, we'll wrap it up, Coxie, with one more question, I guess a summary of everything we've talked about, but what are your goals for, I guess, yourself individually from a coaching perspective? What are your goals throughout the year, but also a team perspective? What do you want to get out of the 2023 season?
I think personally for myself is that just learning to adapt. We get different individuals, different characters in each year, and just learning to adapt and seeing what's the best to make them better, and how they want to be coached. And the conversations I've had with a lot of players is about, obviously the honesty side of things, and I think you can be honest with players, but if you can't teach them how to get better, and when you do speak about honesty, that's where you've got an issue as a coach. So being able to be honest, but also teach and make them learn and develop. From a playing point of view, I think, look, there's no doubt that there's no emphasis on the win-loss, and it's about making the team better. And us as a team, like always, we the cliche, we want to be competitive, we want to showcase our talent, all that type of stuff is obviously at the forefront. But I think that we have got on the back of what we did last year with our 17-year-olds, we've got a little bit of talent that can be highlighted. And we just want to we're very proud as coaches of our region, and we want to continue to help players, coaches in our region to become better. That's our job, and that's what we'll be instilling for most of the year. And thus far, to be honest, gents, it's been quite pleasing.
It's great to hear. We appreciate your time, Coxie, and obviously we'll chat to you later in the year and hope to get you back on the podcast as the season progresses. Thanks, gents, for joining me. Make sure to keep up to date on our socials for more exclusive news and more podcasts. And until then, we will catch you in the next episode.